Hi friends, welcome or welcome back to the Infinite Library, and it has been a year. My 2024 reading year, I'd say, was pretty successful. I read a lot of books I really loved. I also read a lot of books I really didn't like. This was the year that I finally started DNFing stuff. I read a lot of books that maybe weren't in my comfort zone or outside of my typical genres, which I really enjoyed doing. I found new favorites that I wasn't expecting to find, but because of like this whole Goodreads challenge I did, that basically made me read in a bunch of genres I would never normally have read from. I read really all over the place, I've got to say. So that definitely did lead to me having books that I hated because they're books I probably wouldn't have normally picked up anyway, but I found some unexpected surprises. So this is just going to be a little chat video, and I'm just going to go over some stats with you of what my reading year was like, basically, because I just find that kind of thing quite interesting. I'm probably also going to show you some graphics from my reading spreadsheet and the Storygraph stats, because there's some really interesting like analytics that Storygraph puts together at the end of the year. One of the reasons, honestly, why I still use Storygraph as well as Goodreads, even though it's a bit of a pain to keep both updated, I really enjoy not just like the challenges and stuff that you can do on there, but I enjoy the stats that they produce because they're so interesting. Let's have a look, and I'm also going to be kind of comparing what my 2024 reading was like compared to the previous year, because there was a big improvement, I would say. I know partly this is because I've been reading stuff for BookTube, for my channel, but I read so much more than I read the previous year, and I'm not like looking to hit the same number again in 2025, but I've definitely, I think, because I've read so much, have learned a lot about my reading and what kind of things work for me and what doesn't work for me. So I'm hoping to have a more successful reading year, not in terms of me reading more, but me reading better is the hope for 2025. So in total, I read 200 books in 2024. In 2023, I read 130 books. So that is apparently a percentage increase of 53%, which pretty impressed with, to be honest. 200 was not my goal for the year. Happy with any number, to be honest, but because I did 130, I was like, I'll set my goal at like 100. And then I was reading so fast, I was like, oh, I guess I'll set it higher. And then 200 just seemed like a nice round number to end on, and I was almost there anyway. So yeah. It wasn't my intention to read as much as I did, but I'm pretty happy about 200 books read. Overall then, the number of pages I read was 66,185 compared to 2023, which was practically half of that. I read 37,843, so that is a percentage increase of 74%. I know definitely as well the fact I read a lot of manga this year, what with my manga challenge, has contributed to that majorly, because they are so quick to read. We're reading a 200-page book and I can get through a manga in like half an hour to 40 minutes or something. And I read a lot back in, I think it was May, when I did my 30 and 30 manga challenge. Pages is a weird one when you read a lot of manga and graphic novels. And funnily enough, speaking of that challenge, my best reading month was indeed May. I read 42 books in May. That is almost a quarter of my whole reading year in 1 month, and that was mostly because I obviously read 30 manga, and then somehow I still managed to read 12 books on top of that, just standard books. Don't know how I did that, quite honestly. Like, I know manga's easy to read, but I didn't think I was going to read much else that month other than manga, so I'm kind of impressed at myself, to be honest. Right, ratings is an interesting one that I want to have a look at with you now, because I have some very diverse ratings this year, and it's also a lot of like lower ratings, which is what I mean about how I discovered a lot of things I don't like this year, and I'm hoping that I will not have as many low ratings next year. So we're gonna go from the worst to the best. I DNF'd 23 books this year, which may not seem a lot by other standards, but when you think about the fact that the previous year I only DNF'd 5 books, and I used to be someone that just wouldn't DNF. I was such a completionist. Like, even if I wasn't enjoying a book, I was like, no, I'm gonna get through it. I was just so bad for that kind of thing, and I still think I definitely do like push myself through some books that maybe I should have just dropped, but I think I'm getting better at realizing when I just don't care about a book anymore. DNFing sometimes for your mental health as well is so important. So yeah, DNF 23, I had 2 1-star books, which if you've seen my worst books of the year, you'll know exactly what those are. I don't think I've ever really 1-starred a book before, but I did find 2 this year to 1-star. It feels like such a brutal rating to use, but yeah, I did indeed have to go there this year, because I just realized I was looking at all the books I was 2-starring and I was like, these 2 are worse. I gave 20 books 2 stars, which I'm not really happy about. Like I said, I'm hoping to read better books next year. This is where it gets interesting, because I feel like previously I gave more books 3 stars than I gave 4 stars. They're actually very close this year in terms of the ratings. I gave 80 books 3-star rating, and I gave 81 books 4 stars. So it's leaning ever so slightly more towards 4-star. I'd like to get that 3-star ratio down even more, if possible, this year, but I'm happy to see that at least I'm still getting a lot of 4 stars. And in terms of the 5 stars, I had 18 of those throughout the year, which is pretty respectful, to be honest. In 2023, I only had 10 books that were 5 stars, an improvement. And my yearly average is actually slightly higher than it was the previous year. In 2023, it was 3.65, and now it is 3.76, which isn't that big of an improvement, but I think, again, this is showing how I'm actually 4-starring more, and my 3 stars were not as bad, I guess. Still pretty bad, but you know what I mean. On to series. I actually am planning to do like a whole look at my series tracker at some point and go through all the series that I am currently reading, all the series I'm DNFing, all the series I still need to start, because that is definitely something I'd like to do more in 2025, and I'm hoping by focusing on my physical TBR I will be, is that I'm actually hopefully going to be completing more series or making progress in series. I have read so many books this year, or mostly just beginnings of series or standalones, and I feel like I've not really read a whole lot of actual series, and I'd like to do more of that because I feel like there are so many series I want to put my time into. By the way, as well, I am going to be counting DNFs into what I'm saying here, as in I have DNF'd a series. So the number of new series I started in 2024 is not a number I'm proud of. It's 81. I feel like a lot of these are like first books in series, particularly stuff like the manga. A lot of them were not standalone books, they're like parts of bigger series. And I obviously just started volume 1 of a whole bunch of them. And I feel like I've also, because I've been trying a lot of books for challenges, books I picked up from book boxes, a lot of them were book 1. And also some of them were book 1s and the next books aren't out yet, that kind of thing. So it's still a bad number. I'm just trying to make excuses now. Of those 81, I am not carrying on 28 of those series. So I can't remember how many series that means I am. Number here of how many series I do intend to continue, but of those 81 I started, 28 I was like, I'm out. The number of series I actually managed to complete in 2024 then is kind of a pitiful number compared to that, but I'm glad I did at least do some, I suppose. So the series I did complete, I completed 8 series in total. Of those series, they are the Letters of Enchantment series, which is Divine Rivals, Ruthless Vows. I did the Strange the Dreamer duology that I both started and finished it in this year. Dictatorial Grimoire, this was a manga 3-volume series. I did volume 1 and volume 2 years ago, never finished it. So for, I think it was for my fairy tale vlog actually, Fairy Tellings, I did finally actually complete that series. Higurashi, I'm still working through Higurashi. I didn't really read very much this year, but I did manage to finish another arc in that series, and I'm counting them as mini-series within the overall series. So I managed to complete the Demon Exposing arc, which is Higurashi no Nakakoroni Onisare Shishen, which I think was only 2 volumes, but still, it's progress. I reread a series, that's the thing. I also reread the Girls series by Jacqueline Wilson. I read all 4 books in that series, and then the new one, Think Again, which came out as well. So that was a series that for now, I don't think she's writing any more books for that anymore. The new book was a surprise, but I don't think she's going to carry that on. So I'm going to say it's a series completion for me, even if it was mostly a reread. I also finished off 2 other manga series. I finished My Brother's Husband, which was a 2-volume series, although they're quite big volumes, I think. And Doubt, which is a horror survival series, which I had them in 2 omnibuses, but they're like 4 volumes ordinarily. And the final series I finished was the Atlas series by Olivia Blake. Didn't end on a good note, unfortunately, but at least I finished it and I don't have to think about it anymore. So in terms of the books that I read then, 111 books throughout the year were part of a series, and then I read 115 standalone books. So you can see what I mean now about how I read a lot of books that weren't part of a series. I read a lot of just, it's a book and it's done kind of things. Just visually, because I like to see this kind of thing. This is the books that I read throughout this year. I don't have all of them technically physically, so I've just put in some stand-ins that are basically the same length as those books. There were books that were either library books or books I'd given away or audiobooks. So this gives a really nice visual representation of what 200 books looks like. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy looking at that. And also, we're going to break it down into monthly books, what I read every single month. So we're going to do this here. Right, into some more intricate stats. Stuff that I just think is pretty interesting to see in terms of what kinds of things I'm reading. So first we're going to look at format. So for me, format is anything that isn't a typical novel. Manga is one of those. I read 55 manga books this year, which last year was 25, so that's a definite improvement. Like, I know I read 30 of those for a challenge, but I still read a good number after that point too. Graphic novels. This was actually a reduction this year. I only read 8 graphic novels this year. Last year was 12. And I do put this down to the fact that I was focusing on so many novels, and because I don't really buy graphic novels very often because they're so expensive. I just tend to prioritize other things. I also haven't really been buying manga either. But with graphic novels, I often get them from the library, and to be honest, the library selection is not amazing. Yeah, between a case of me not really prioritizing this year and not really being able to get hold of them, that's why that number is so low when I read 12 last year. And audiobooks, this is a new statistic. I didn't really read audiobooks before this year. I read 2 last year, which was, I guess, me just trialing audiobooks for the first time. And then this year, I read 54 books via audio, which is kind of impressive. That is like just over a quarter of all of the books I read this year was either like fully via audio, or I was going back and forth between the audio and the physical. And I do think that is also one of the reasons why I've gotten through as many books as I have gotten through, because audiobook for me is so good for like when I'm traveling, when I'm just doing something and I want something on in the background because it's not anything that's like taking too much brain power to do. When I'm going for a walk, it's so useful for that kind of thing. It has definitely been a way for me to get through more books than I would have originally, because I've just been basically like any kind of like dead time I'm putting an audiobook in. So genre wise, this is an interesting one. So we're gonna go from the genres that I read the most to the genres I read the least this year. Surprising nobody, my most popular genre is fantasy. I feel like that is probably never going to change. Like, I wanted to read more horror and sci-fi this year, which I did, but I think fantasy is always going to be my main genre. 90 of the books I read this year were fantasy. 2023 was 61 books, so pretty comparable, to be honest. Horror books, I did want to read more than last year, and I did. I feel like I still didn't read as much horror as I wanted to read this year, sadly. I read 44 horror books this year. I read 33 the previous year. So good, but I kind of want to read more horror. Then, funnily enough, a genre which I never really see as being very high is the next most read genre, and that's contemporary fiction. Whether this is literary, whether this is just YA kind of stuff or a romance, that kind of thing. But I read 20 of those this year, as opposed to 15 that I read the previous year. Next, mystery thriller. This is something that I started to get into last year, and then I'm still kind of reading them this year, but I don't think I read as many this year, to be honest. So I read 16 mystery or thriller books this year. Last year was 18. Another genre though that I did have significant improvement on, which was my aim, was sci-fi. I read 17 sci-fi books this year as opposed to 10 last year. I will say my book club has been so good for that kind of thing, because I give options out and people have really been like leaning towards the sci-fi, which is kind of a surprise for me. So definitely, like, I can thank my book club for quite a few of those sci-fi books that I've read this year. Just on the topic of my book club, actually, these are all the books that we picked to read this year, and it's really interesting. I had some really good books in this year, and there was also a lot of stinkers as well, so it's been a mixed year in terms of my book club. But I also feel like my book club members have been enjoying more of the books this year than they were previously, so a win for that, I guess. The other books that I read, non-fiction, because of the Goodreads stuff, I read more than I normally would do. I read 16 non-fiction books, as opposed to just 5 that I read the previous year. Romance is another genre that is never typically in my wheelhouse, but I read 8 romance books this year. I have no clue for last year because I don't think I read any. And then the final genre I'm just going to mention very briefly is memoir. It is a genre that I do like to read, so I read 4 of those this year. Last year was just 2, so a slight improvement. Okay, on to how I read these books, as in where I got them from. This one is interesting. So obviously my main plan for 2025 is to read more from my physical TBR, but I did actually read quite a lot from my own TBR, which is more than I thought. I read 86 books from my existing TBR this year. I did 90 books from the library, which did not realize I'd taken out that many books from the library. That's kind of impressive. Some of those are from borrow books, so like ebooks, audiobooks as well. But still, I'm kind of impressed that I used the library as much as I did. And then just like other sources, e.g. like there were books that I reread, there were books I borrowed from people, they were ARCs, 25 books. On to some more miscellaneous stats, I guess. It's just stuff that I just find randomly interesting. With stuff that I don't normally track when I do my like monthly wrap-ups and stuff, but stuff that I just think is interesting to see my reading trends, I guess. So, authors is the first thing I want to look at. I read 112 authors that were completely new to me this year, which is decent. That's over half of the books that I read were authors that I was giving a chance. So I read 86 authors I had read before, whether that was sequels, whether it was other books by authors that I previously liked. Age range, definitely seeing that skew now towards me kind of getting out of YA, I've got to say. I read 147 adult books, 81 YA, so still reading a lot of YA. Honestly, it's a lot more than it was last year. I only read 27 YA books in 2023, but I read 81 this year, so it's technically higher, but if you compare it to adult, I'm definitely reading more adult books, and I'm definitely feeling that YA for me is more of an exception to read now rather than like something I would always go for. And middle grade is something that I really am also not reading that much. I think I read 7 middle grade, and I feel like most of those were me rereading like Jacqueline Wilson. My most read author was Jacqueline Wilson with 8 books, and I know only one of those books was adult. So all my middle grade this year was Jacqueline Wilson. She is my most read author this year, and that's purely because I did the project of me trying to reread a lot of my old favourites because of her new book coming out. Like I reread the whole Girls series, I reread a lot of like other ones I really liked. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me, although it also really isn't indicative of her being like a favourite author of mine, because she isn't really. I didn't really enjoy all those books on a reread, unfortunately, but she's definitely like an old nostalgic author for me. So yeah, she was my top one. And the next three authors, I read 4 books from each, funnily enough, and 2 of them are mangas. So really it's just me reading a lot of the same series. So we have Komomi Shirahama, who is the mangaka for Witch Hat Atelier. I read the first 4 books. I've now read books 5 and 6 too, so I'm still reading a lot by her. And I also read 4 books by Moku Moku Ren, who is the author of Summer Hikaru Died. So the only other author that I read the most from this year is Stephen King. I read 4 books by him this year. I think I read From a Buick 8, I read Holly, I read If It Bleeds, I'm halfway through it. I read him the most. So interesting to see that. Diversity statistics. This is more to do with initially countries and how many books I read at LGBT+. I do primarily try to read as much LGBT as possible as a member of the community. Country-wise first. As kind of expected, I didn't really read as diversely in terms of country. Again, because I was doing a lot of stuff for projects, and a lot of these authors are American, so there's no surprise that the top country I read from was America, 73 books. United Kingdom following shortly afterwards by 60. I want to read more diversely, definitely, in the future. Japan, however, was the third one because I read loads of manga, so 54 books from Japan. The other highest numbers was Canada, I read 5 books, and Australia, I read 3 books. And then I've just got a smattering of other countries that I read like 1 or 2 books from. Africa, the Caribbean, China, Korea, France, India, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Jamaica, Poland, New Zealand, Singapore, and Spain. But not a whole lot, really. I definitely want to try and read more, like, nationality-wise, I think, in future. Now, in terms of diversity in general in books, 79 of my books were LGBT+ books. Definitely want that to be a high number next year. But again, because I was reading stuff for projects, I tried to pick queer books where I could, but I didn't always have the choice to do that, unfortunately. And 70 books were diverse in terms of race. Some last other statistics we have here, just because I thought this was interesting, this was something that was in the spreadsheet, and it actually makes you put down your publishers. So you can work out like what publishers you read the most from, which I thought was kind of fun. So I've discovered that I apparently have read the most from Harper. Whether it's HarperCollins, Harper Voyager, they have different like subdivisions. But I read 16 books from Harper. Hodder was my next one with 11. Also Penguin with 11. And then finally Yen Press with 10 books because manga. And then the final stats I'll mention is in terms of releases. How many of the books that I read in 2024 actually released in 2024? 47, which I don't think is too bad. Just under a quarter of all my books were releases that came out at the year of me reading. So that means I had 156 books which were backlist titles. I'm always going to read all the books as well. So I'm never ever going to be reading like purely new releases. And I don't want to either because there's just so many good books out there. And then this is the final numbers then I'm going to mention. Before I just give you some like overall impressions of how I felt this year and what I discovered this year. It's my name and shame stats, I guess. I'm naming me and I'm shaming me. So, how many books did I haul this year? I am counting free books that I've been given as well, whether it's like from publishers, ARCs, whatever. 251. And that isn't counting the books I've been slowly gathering for a specific project I'm doing this year. So that's not great. I probably should not be buying as many books as that, although I didn't buy all those books, I know. 251. You can see why I didn't manage to get to 50% read of all those. And how many books did I unhaul this year is 30. I got rid of 30 books this year. Most of them I donated or I gave to friends. A couple I've sold, but mostly I donate. So we're going to take a quick look together at what places I use online. Told me stats wise. I know for a fact that this one is slightly inaccurate because it says 201 books because I accidentally have a book that I DNF'd, I think. And apparently, even if you put a book as DNF'd, if you put a review date, not a review date, but like an end date for it, it marks it. And I thought I'd fixed it, but I haven't. So we're just stuck with these slightly inaccurate stats. So we have a nice little graphic here, which is saying my shortest book I read the year, which was The Tea Dragon Society, 71 pages. And then my longest book was 845 pages with The Priory of the Orange Tree. If I had actually managed to read it That would have been here instead. Average book length was about 300 pages. The most shelved and the least shelved. This is an interesting one. So the book that I read, which was the most popular on Goodreads, was The Housemaid. Not really surprised about that, to be honest. And then the least shelved was this random Higurashi volume, which I don't think I could even find a picture of it in English. I could only find a picture of it, as you can see, in Japanese. So only 105 other people have apparently marked this book as, well, not even read, but like they've got it on their shelves on Goodreads. My highest rated book on Goodreads, well, the book that was the most highest rated, I guess, was the 4th volume of Apothecary Diaries, which I didn't love, actually, which is quite funny. 4.48 average rating. I think I gave this a 3. My first review of the year was for Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, which I believe initially was a 5-star, and I downgraded it to a 4-star. And then there's just a little graphic that shows you all of the books that I read throughout the year. Oh, my last review of the year was for Chain Gang All-Stars. Very sparse, but Storygraph, however, have a much more in-depth one. So let's have a look at the 2024 reading wrap-up. This one is a lot more interesting in terms of what kind of data they pull out. I've actually been trying to be good to like review as many books as I can as well, like not written reviews, but like marking them up with like data and stuff. The first book I read was Snow Fairy, which was a manga, and the last book I read was Land of Milk and Honey. The reason it's different from Goodreads is because the Goodreads has only marked what I've reviewed, whereas this is literally my first book, my last book of the year. My 2024, this is a mood map. Lighter books push the line up and darker books pull the line down. So apparently I've just read darker and darker as the year has gone on, which doesn't surprise me because I think I read more horrors towards the end of the year. You explored the shadows of the human psyche, set off on thrilling quests, and followed cryptic trails of secrets. The narratives flowed at a comfortable, engaging tempo. That's probably AI generated, I'm not sure. This is just a graph to show how I read. You can see that massive jump there in May when I did my 30 manga in 30 days challenge. But I did actually started the year a bit lower, and then I kind of gradually was a little bit higher, I think, as it went on. Took me around 5 days to finish each book. I think that's a lie because I will sit and read a manga in like an hour. Yeah, at least time spent Snow Fairy a day. Most mangas were a day. Oh, this doesn't surprise me. Most time spent 70 days to read The Book Eaters by Sun Yi. This was a buddy read, and I was waiting on the other person to catch up, so there was a lot of time spent when I just wasn't reading this, so I had to put it aside basically. Oh, and these are all my 5 stars, which is a decent amount, I think. It's a little ratings graph there. Some months are better than others. January was my highest average rating. May was, of course, my most pages read. July was not my favourite month with an average rating of 3.44. Oh, and in this one, it's got the same stats actually, but in this one, the most shelved is actually Priory of the Orange Tree. This is like the highest rated because they gave it a 5-star. I really love this manga. But yeah, the shelved is actually a book that is still not got a picture. But this was an ARC review I had of a graphic novel. Me and two other people, sorry. I don't get this one because I definitely had other 5 stars. Oh, I wonder if I was the first person to review it. Is that why? Oh, yeah, I was the first person to ever review this book, so that explains that. Yeah, so series stuff, revisited 14 books, completed 4 reading challenges, and yeah, that is all the books I read. So those are those stats, I guess. These are the more interesting ones now. This is the one that tells you more in depth. So this is a very fun thing they have, which is mood, which you can track what you think are the moods of a book once you've read it to see what kind of vibes it gave you, I suppose. So my biggest moves were dark, doesn't surprise me, adventure, mysterious, and emotional, followed by tense, light-hearted, funny, reflective, hopeful, informative, sad, challenging, inspiring, and the very last one, which I put barely any in, is relaxing. I don't like to read relaxing books, apparently. Pace-wise, I think I generally, like most books I read, are quite medium-paced. A couple of slow-paced ones, though.
and some fast-paced ones. Page number, I didn't read that many, that was only over 500, but I did read a couple. And then we've got like a fairly even split here, literally even split, my god, between under 300 pages and between 400 and 500, which is quite funny. Yeah, predominantly read fiction, 91% fiction, 9% non-fiction. This splits down into genres, but I don't really like this one as much because it's got some really weird specific ones that I wouldn't normally kind of use. Format. Oh, okay, so I didn't really track anything I did by audio and Storygraph, so that's why that's a 0. But digital, it's ebooks, so 10% ebooks, and the only one it's tracked is actually that Patients Are Not Forsaken. Most read authors, we know about these ones, but also we have Natsu Hyuga, Neko Karage, Ayumi Kanao, T. Kingfisher, and Shuzo Ushimi. The average rating, again, I've already seen. So yeah, that's all the stats. Quite interesting, I think.
So, just a few things that I guess I've noticed through looking at these stats, through looking at what I've read this year, some interesting patterns that I think are kind of telling me things about my own reading and what I like to read. Number 1, I don't hate romance books anymore. This is something that I feel was like almost a bitter pill to swallow, because I always joke about how romance is not for me, but I've been quite liking some romance this year, whether it's books that are not necessarily categorized as romance and just have romance in them, or I've read some straight out romances and I've liked them. Like, it doesn't always work for me, but I'm starting to work out what things in romance do work for me. But yeah, interesting. For sure, because I just did not peg me as a romance reader. I don't think it's ever going to be like one of my favourite genres or anything, but I think in future I have to not necessarily be put off as soon as it's a romance book I'm going to be reading. Number 2, I'm very picky when it comes to sci-fi books, I've discovered, and I still haven't really figured out what sci-fi I like yet. It's been so hit and miss for me this year with sci-fi. I've either really liked a sci-fi or I've just kind of found it meh. And I don't really know what the pattern is for it. Like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, I like cozy sci-fi, but then I'll find certain ones quite boring. I think I'm discovering actually that I am liking near future sci-fi and ones that are a little bit more grounded in realism, even though I really thought I would like the more fantastical ones. I don't know, I'm still figuring that out, I guess. Maybe I will have a better idea next year how I feel about sci-fi. Number 3, actually bouncing off the romance one here, I like Why Choose romance much more than I like love triangles. I mean, I never really liked love triangles anyway, but yeah, I'm discovering that Polly and Why Choose is something that I much prefer in my books. So that is something interesting I've discovered about myself. Number 4, this is kind of a sad one, and something that it's taken me quite a while to realise is that I have just not really been feeling epic fantasy books recently. I still love reading fantasy, but I have not been drawn to the really big, epic kind of things. Stuff like Wheel of Time, stuff like, I still love Lord of the Rings, don't get me wrong, but I feel like I didn't feel like ever picking it up this year. And I've been much more interested in more smaller scale fantasies, in fantasies that are kind of set in the same world. I definitely have still loved some epic fantasy this year, but then you look at books like Priory of the Orange Tree, and I feel like that should have been something I adored, and I just wasn't getting into it. I struggled with Robin Hobb as well. Again, Robin Hobb, long, dense fantasy, and I was just really struggling my way through it. I just wanted something that was more quick-paced, and I think for me, right now, I'm just not in the mood for really epic fantasy, and I think I just have to admit that to myself and just maybe not try to read as many, and then hopefully I will get back into it again. But for now, at least, I'm just more interested in different types of fantasy rather than epic. Number 6, kind of also bouncing off that, queer cozy fantasy is kind of becoming a new favourite subgenre of mine. I have read a couple this year, what with The Honey Witch, Till Death Do Us Bard, there's a couple of others as well, and I'm just really loving those kind of books. I'm loving more low stakes fantasy that is about characters and interactions and about them living their lives, less so than like war and stuff. I don't know, it's just a happier genre for me, and I've just been having a really nice time with it. I know there's kind of like a trend at the moment where cozy fantasy is popular, but it's kind of not seen as good fantasy also because it's cozy, but I've just really been enjoying it, and it's really been hitting what I want from fantasy this year, I think. Number 7, I really miss reading manga, and I've really been reading quite a lot of manga actually since the year has started, since just before the year has started actually. And I'm having such a good time doing so. And there are so many series that I want to read and catch up with. So that's something I really want to prioritize going forward, that I just want to put more time towards manga, I think. Also with anime, to be honest, as well. That's something else that I feel like I've been really struggling with, and I've been really missing it. I really want to just get more back into manga anime again, because it used to be like everything to me, and it has become less so as I've been reading more books. And whilst I love books, I will never not read books. I just want to include more manga back into it again. The next one, I have discovered that I actually read my fastest when I'm doing stuff like prompts and readathons. For some reason, like the serotonin boost from being like, ooh, I'm fulfilling a prompt, ooh, I don't know what I'm going to read next because I have to roll for it, really works for me. I kind of read a lot slower without that, and again, it kind of shows that I'm not really a mood reader, because when I have the excitement of having anything as my next read, it honestly just makes me so excited to read. And like, I'm still loving the books I'm reading, but I'm also just really excited for what I'm reading next, and that makes me read faster. So yeah, something I really enjoyed, and something I'm going to carry on doing definitely, because I worked out it really works for me in terms of my reading to have these kind of like little goals, little games that you're playing along with it. And then the final thing I'm just going to say, and just to look back at my channel, really, I can't say I've really had very much growth in this channel. I'm still kind of sat around the 200 members mark. I'd love to get higher, but I'm aware that I'm just not a very popular channel. I'm probably, I don't know, not the most interesting person to listen to. I try my best, but at the end of the day, I do these videos for me. And if people like them, great, but that isn't why I made this channel. So I also just have to kind of be okay with that fact that I'm never going to be a very big channel. But I still really been enjoying some of the projects I've done this year. I'm really proud of them, honestly, as well. My favourite ones, there was the reading the Fae retellings, really enjoyed that. Can't wait to do more installments of that, because I just love fairy tale retellings in books. And like, I dressed up for it, which was really fun. I watched some movies for it. Again, combining things I love together, movies, dressing up, books, so good. 1330 manga challenge, really enjoyed that. It's not something I'll see myself doing again anytime soon, but I love just getting to try so many series and like finding new favourites from that. Rereading old favourites, something that I also want to keep doing. I have a lot of plans for this. There's a lot of books that I've been feeling really nostalgic about. I was saying how funny it was that when I went to Heian Y, where it's all mostly secondhand bookshops, pretty much all the books I brought were like old childhood nostalgic books for me. I didn't really buy new books, and I'm enjoying that whole rereading process, even if I don't always think the books kind of like stand up. But I like making these projects about books that are also not the new hot thing, shedding that light on series that maybe people have forgotten about. A series that I really enjoyed, it is just a Goodreads Awards one, not necessarily me reading them as I have been doing. I feel like the excitement for that series has dwindled as I've gone on, unfortunately. But when it comes to the time of year when it's the Goodreads Awards, it's such a silly little thing, but I just have so much fun, like trying to predict what's going to be in those awards, reading some of them maybe, and it's something I want to do more with this year. I actually want to try and read a whole category this year when it comes time to the Goodreads Awards again, most likely horror, because still feeling a bit shaky with fantasy. But I really enjoy doing that, and again, it's just like a big community thing which I have a lot of fun with. So yeah, that's it, I guess, for the stats for my reading year in review. I think it was a pretty good year, but I think there's definitely some changes I want to make in 2025. And yeah, I just hope to read lots of really good books and have a really good time until we do this stats review again. So until the next video, I guess, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you next time. Bye!